This is the story of how one woman overcame her worst nightmare at the height of her success. Today's story is called The Seeds of Resilience.
Season 3 of the story features 12 trailblazers who created technologies that changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. And now, on to the story.
Sherry sat at the airport gate and watched her husband and children. They were waiting to board the plane. The kids jumped up and down every time an airplane rolled past the window. Life is good, she thought. She had been blessed with an incredible husband and 2 beautiful children. Her job also filled her with joy. The company was thriving under her direction, and they almost doubled their revenue in the past year alone. Sherry and her family were on a trip to Mexico. They planned to take paddleboarding lessons, hang out in the sun, the beach, hike in the tropical forests, and build sandcastles. Upon their arrival, they started knocking out their bucket list of fun things to do. By the time the 3rd day rolled around, Sherry and her husband needed some time alone. They left their children with the staff at Kids Zone and planned out their day. Her husband was headed to the gym, and she was going to take a much-needed nap. The moment Sherry's head hit the pillow, she was out. She woke up from her sleep with her phone buzzing. It was a text message from a friend. She looked at the time. Her husband was supposed to wake her up almost an hour ago. Where was he? She needed to go pick up the kids. Sherry walked over to the gym to see what was taking him so long. The gym was silent when she reached the door. She swiped her key card and entered. She looked around. There was no one inside. Then she spotted her husband. He was collapsed and lying against the wall. Sherry raced over to him and checked his pulse. Nothing. He wasn't breathing. She sprung into action and began CPR and chest compressions. Nothing. She screamed for help. The next moments were a blur. A man and woman heard her screams and ran into the gym to help. They called 911, and soon the paramedics were there. Tears blurred her vision, and she could barely hear the paramedics when they told her the news. Her husband was gone. Weeks later, Sherry found her mind wandering to thoughts of her grandmother. Her grandmother was someone she looked to for courage, bravery, and wisdom. She grew up hearing tales about her grandmother's resilience. Sherry's grandmother was one of the only women in her hometown to attend college. She was looked down upon by the community and was constantly told to drop out so she could stay home to raise her family. While in her 30s, her grandmother battled breast cancer. This was at a time when cancer treatments were limited. After winning the fight with cancer, she decided to start a business to help women get breast cancer screenings. To keep the business going, she would drive around the neighborhood selling watches out of her car. Sherry's grandmother was proof that businesses could be a force for good. The message from her family was a bit different. Her father was an ophthalmologist and her mother was a teacher. Sherry would look back and say that she was raised to believe that going into business was a bad thing, and that she was supposed to be a doctor or work for the government or a nonprofit. Both her siblings followed this advice and went into medicine. Sherry was a hardworking and brilliant student. She went to Harvard and studied economics there. She was at the top of her class. Her advisor was Lawrence Summers, and after her graduation, he left to become the World Bank's chief economist. When he offered her a job, she accepted. A couple years later, she was considering going back to law school, or maybe getting an MBA. She settled on an MBA at Harvard and graduated. About that time, Lawrence Summers became Treasury Secretary of the Clinton administration. He offered her a position as his chief of staff. She accepted. But the untraditional path was still calling her name. After a few years, she received a surprising phone call. It was the CEO of a growing technology company. He was relentless in his pursuit and candid in his phone messages. Some of them included such gems as, "Don't be an idiot. This is a rocket ship. Get on it." She finally agreed to meet him for lunch, intent on turning him down. But soon she was intrigued by his confidence. Maybe they were onto something. They talked about the future. He convinced her that private companies were way more mission-driven than the job she was currently at, and they could have a much bigger impact in the world. She accepted the offer to work at this rocket ship company, even though it had a weird name, Google. 7 years later, after developing Google's successful ad program, another prominent Silicon Valley CEO reached out. It took 6 weeks of dinner meetings until the CEO offered her the new job. This one was as the COO. She left Google and was now on a mission to transform this new company. Her efforts paid off, and the company saw annual revenues go from $150 million to $1.5 billion. Her boss has nothing but praise for her, saying that she built the whole business part of our company. I didn't know anything about running a company, and we knew what we wanted to get, but we didn't have the vision to get there. Sherry provided that. Along her wild startup ride, she always had one constant area of support and encouragement: her husband. She had met her husband a long time ago, way before they started dating. After they got married, he would take delight in embellishing the story of how they met. Every time that someone asked, he would explain that they had first gone to dinner and a movie with a mutual friend. Their connection must have been real because she fell asleep on his shoulder at the movie. I was sort of smitten, he said. And then he would laugh and go on to say that he later learned that Sherry would fall asleep in many movies on any nearby shoulder. So it didn't mean as much to her as it meant to me. But it worked for me. The two went about their lives for a few years until they both ended up in San Francisco. He was CEO of a technology startup called SurveyMonkey. One year, they decided to spend winter break together. It worked out, and they married soon after. Sherry would look back and say, "The best decision I ever made was to marry him." Now it was 2015, and she found herself flying home from their Mexico vacation with an empty seat next to her. Every day after that was a battle. Life seemed to continue for everyone else, but not for her. There was no light, no joy, and no hope for the future. Her husband, that had been the best decision of her life, was now gone. She fell into a dark place. After that, she felt like it was a survival mindset she was forced into. Soon she was just going through the motions of life. As a form of therapy, she decided to write a book. It was her second book. She gave it some thought and then penned the line: "I was in the void, a vast emptiness that fills your heart and lungs and restricts your ability to think or even breathe." The manuscript seemed to write itself from there. She felt like she was merely the medium to get these words onto paper. The book was called Option B, and it was published in 2017. The author's first book was called Lean In, and Sherry in this story is none other than Sheryl Sandberg. Helen Keller famously said that character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. Sheryl Sandberg found a path through the darkness. Like her grandmother, she found a way to turn her pain into a message of hope and service for others who are hurting. Sheryl would say that the seeds of resilience are planted in the way we process the negative events of our lives. Sheryl now looks to the future and their children with hope. Just after her husband Dave passed away, she posted these words about her children: "Their strength these past few days is the best sign I could ever have that Dave is still here with us in spirit. Things will never be the same, but the world is better for the years my beloved husband lived." Life is going to throw curveballs at each of us. Pain, disease, heartache, and death are real. But everyone has a chance to practice resilience. The question that each of us have to face is that when those hard times come, how will we respond? The darkness is always there. We can choose that anytime. But so is the option to choose resilience. We can embrace the darkness, or we can choose resilience. In those moments of choice, our futures will be shaped. That's her story. What's yours going to be?
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Story. We have an exclusive giveaway for listeners of The Story: 2 free tickets to Dreamforce. Dreamforce brings together thought leaders, industry pioneers, and customers for 4 high-energy days of learning, inspiration, equality, fun, and incredible concerts. Head to thestorypodcast.com and enter to win today. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor Salesforce for sharing these stories of technology trailblazers who changed the world.
If you like this episode of The Story, please help spread these stories by telling one friend. Also, you can hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Story is created by our team here at The Mission. The Mission is your #1 source for accelerated learning. To get more stories and podcasts like this and our world-class newsletter, subscribe at themission.co. That's themission.co. See you next time.